Have you ever felt like you're carrying something heavy, but you can't explain why? Hi, family. It's Adria, your host. Welcome back to Love by Podcast, the space where we break silence, talk truth, and everything in between. Maybe it's anxiety that seems to run through your family. Maybe it's anger you don't understand, or maybe it's silence, the kinds where people know something happens, but nobody ever talks about. That right there is generational trauma, the wounds we inherit without realizing it. And the truth is, if we don't name it, we pass it along to the next generation. And before we dive in, I want to say this episode is for awareness and reflection. If you know of someone struggling with mental health, or if you yourself are, please seek support from trusted professionals. My goal is to spark conversation and healing, and to help you start thinking about the cycles we carry and how we can begin to break them. So, what does generational trauma look like? Trauma doesn't just disappear over time. Families carry it in habits, unspoken rules, and even physical reactions. And we might hear common messages like, don't cry, don't question adults. What happens in this house stays in this house. And I remember that one right there specifically resonates with me because I do remember my mom saying that to us. And coming from a Dominican family, I feel like my mom was always in some sort of fear. And, like she just wouldn't know. She would fear, I guess, of them sending her back to the Dominican Republic. She would fear the possibility of us being taken away from her. She was always living out of fear. And she passed that along to us. There were other common messages like, don't show your emotions to others. That was another one that was really big in my community as well, because they wanted to ensure that we didn't grow up quote unquote weak. So if you showed your emotions, showing your emotions meant you were weak. So showing your emotions was a weakness. And in reality, it really isn't. I feel like when you express your emotions, you show your emotions, it's very extremely brave. And another thing is that children pick up on the tension and the fear, and if it's never spoken about. According to the American Psychological Association, notes trauma can alter DNA and stress responses, meaning it can biologically pass down to children. And that right there is called secondhand trauma. And I know you guys have heard of secondhand smoking, where you don't have to smoke right next to, you don't have to be a smoker. However, if you've been exposed to cigarettes over time, you end up getting, or you can get secondhand smoking, right? And trauma is the same way. So just because you may have not lived that trauma, it still doesn't mean, but you were around that trauma, or you were next to someone that has that trauma, and that trauma is still living in them, then of course you'll still be able to feel that secondhand trauma. And studies show as of 2022, children of trauma survivors have a higher risk of anxiety, depression, and PTSD. Again, even though they don't directly experience the trauma. Numbers do not lie, guys. It's right there. The numbers are there. And if this is making you think about your own family, Pause for a second and share this episode with someone you love. Healing starts with conversation. Now, let's talk about how communities carry trauma differently. This is a good one. In Black communities, centuries of slavery, Jim Crow, and systemic racism built a culture of survival and strength. But with the strength came something else: silence, suppression of your emotions. In many immigrant families, the messages sound like this: we sacrificed everything so you could succeed. And that sacrifice is real. But for the kids, it can turn into pressure to hide their struggles, to not waste the sacrifices made for them. And I really just want to stay with that message because, again, we're so appreciative, right, of our parents and of what they've done and how they've helped us. The truth. According to the CDC, 61% of US adults report at least one form of childhood trauma. And trauma doesn't just stop with one generation, it ripples down. So, again, 61%. And if you guys are nodding along right now, hit follow. These are conversations that I love to unpack every week, and I don't want you to miss out on the next one. Why silence is so powerful. Silence is tricky because it often masquerades as protection. And you've probably heard it. Again, what happens in this house stays in this house. That's the rule many of us grew up under. And I 100% agree with this. And I remember that was something that my parents instilled in us. And children learn not to talk about fear, abuse, grief. But just because they don't speak about it doesn't mean that they don't feel it. Research shows that the opposite of what we were taught: when families practice open communication, psychological distress goes down. When silence takes over, distress only grows. So, what that means is, if we communicate or if we teach our newer generation to communicate and communicate on so many different things, like communicate your emotions, communicate what you're feeling, communicate when something is wrong, but also communicate when something makes you happy. Just keeping a clear and open space for communication and creating that safe space amongst everyone can really help. And while you're listening, think about one person you could start a safe conversation. So, what does breaking the cycle mean? What does it actually look like? First, name it. Admit and acknowledge the trauma, even if it's uncomfortable. And I know for a fact it's extremely uncomfortable. But the only way that we're able to grow, to evolve, to understand new things is if we actually speak about it and if we actually have these uncomfortable conversations. How is anyone going to know if something affected you if you actually don't speak about it? Second, ask questions. Talk to your parents, your grandparents, your tia, your auntie, your uncles, your mom, your mama. Talk to them. For me, I had to understand that before my mom had us, my mom had her own dreams and aspirations, and she was her own individual person outside of kids. So it's just so amazing when you ask these questions. Like, one of the things that I've recently asked her was, what did you actually want to be when you grew up? And I've never sat there and actually asked my mom that. And I'm sure that I want to challenge you guys to ask your parents or your caregivers, your grandma, your grandfather, what did they want to be when they grew up? And you'll be surprised with some of these responses. The third thing is to create a safe space. And I know that I talk about that a lot because it's extremely important as we're healing, as we're growing, as we're coming up with new practices. It's important to allow people to understand that it is okay to think differently. It is okay for them to just speak, right? And creating that safe space where it's a non judgment zone, and people will feel, or people would be more open minded to therapy, people would be more open minded to family dialogue, cultural healing circles, even journaling. And here's some hope: trauma focused therapy has been shown to reduce depression symptoms by nearly 50% as of 2021 study. That's the power of facing what silence tried to cover.
And family, here's the truth. We don't just inherit eye color. I was lucky because I got some pretty green eyes. Or last names. We inherit silence, fear, and survival patterns. But we also inherit resilience, strength, and power to say, it stops with me. I'm going to be the change. Healing starts with someone who chooses to speak up. And maybe that someone is you. So share this episode, follow the show, and let's keep breaking cycles together. Until next time, stay loved, stay grounded, and stay you.